This little duck carries within it the secrets of mold making and casting. If you knew what this duck knows, you would be a master mold maker. Stick around. I'll tell you what the secret is and how we can learn from the duck. I'm still at my parents' house, and it's one of those times in life when you reflect on the past. And I've been walking around their house and just started to look at the various objects from a mold maker's eye. And I discovered this little duck. And the thing that struck me about this little duck was that the sculptor who made it had a very, very clear understanding of mold making and casting. And that's the secret. If you want to make perfect molds and perfect castings, you need to design the objects that you make, the sculptures, the objects, whatever it is you're making, you need to plan it out and design it for mold making. And if you do that, you eliminate almost all of the problems you have as a mold maker. You guys are sending me projects for the channel every single time I look at it, and I realize that this project was not planned for mold making and casting. And as a result, there's horrendous problems. He's like, oh no, how are you going to cast this? So let's take a close-up look at this duck and find out, what did the sculptor do and why did they do it and how did that help them? I'm sure that this little object was made for sale. It was made to be reproduced in quantity, and the sculptor did everything right to assure that this would be super easy to cast, make reliable casts every time, and therefore be efficient and profitable. So let's look at everything that they did, learn from the duck. Let's learn from the duck and see if we can apply some of these lessons to the things we're making. Let's begin with the texture of the bird. As you can see, there's quite a lot of texture, but here's what you don't see. Notice how smooth that is, laying down and attached to the body. Well, here's the classic rookie mistake. See all those gaps? Those are areas that are going to trap bubbles. No matter what you do, you're almost certainly going to trap bubbles. And even if you're successful in getting the rubber to flow underneath all of those surface details, you're going to create a mold with a very, very rough inner surface. And here's the area of difficulty. Those little rubber points you see here are going to wear out. They're going to be torn out by the resin in each subsequent casting. There's no way to avoid that. And so the mold is going to wear out very quickly, and you're going to start to see these sort of ugly areas where, chunks of rubber have been torn out of your mold. And that's just pretty much unavoidable. So how this sculptor has approached it is by making sure that all of the texture is attached to the body. There are no gaps, there are nothing underneath, and even more, notice how kind of smoothed down it is. It's not razor sharp. You can see how in the shiny points that I kind of buffed out there, it's smoothed over and there's no place to catch rubber underneath them. So as you can see, they got a perfect bubble-free casting. This is how you do texture. It doesn't matter if you're doing hair or scales or fur, anything, like dragon skin. You just see it all the time where people just put this insane amounts of texture on an object, and it just doesn't work at all. It's got to look like this to make a clean casting. Another major secret that this sculptor did perfectly with this duck is mold orientation. And orientation is a huge issue. It's probably even bigger than the surface issue that I started with, because how you hold the mold in space, how you orient it inside so that the cavity is oriented inside of the mold is critical to how well the piece will cast. In fact, it's essential that you get it right, or the piece is not going to cast well. Let's look at some possible ways that you could orient this piece in the mold. Now you could just stand him on his feet and run the vents out of the high points, which is the beak and the top of the head and the tail, and then just put the sprue down the middle of the back, and you can see that the resin would just flow straight down that sprue and very nicely fill up that cavity, and it would rise up to all the high points, and beautiful. It would work great, right? But is it the most optimal arrangement for this duck? I mean, is that the absolute best way you could do it? Well, what about this second option where you turn him 90 degrees with head down? And you do the same thing. You run the vents out of the high points. You run the sprue. Now, one big advantage to this way of doing it is look where the sprue is. On the first panel on the left, the sprue is right in the middle of the back, right in one of the most essential areas of detail. Here on the right, we've moved the sprue to a, that area is very important to the duck, but to us, we don't much care about it. So that's an advantage. We've moved the sprue to a less noticeable area. Both of these arrangements, by the way, would work. Both of them would give give you castings. But are they optimal? Is this the best arrangement? It turns out that our sculptor was brilliant how they oriented the duck for casting, and they came up with the absolute perfect solution with the least work in preparing the mold and the least cleanup afterwards. So how did they do it? They oriented it so that one foot became the funnel and that same leg became the sprue. And of course the resin would just fall straight in and fill up all of the areas like the beak and the face and the tail and all of the areas that are of greatest interest and require to be the cleanest part of the sculpt because they're the most important part of the sculpt. And then the other leg becomes the vent, and all of the air would just rush right out the other leg, and it would fill up perfectly without any issues. And it has another huge advantage. Look where the parting line is. The parting line runs around the bottom of the piece where there are the least important part of the animal because you don't look at it so much. So that means that the face and the head and all of the key areas, the top surfaces of the areas that you see the most, have no parting line at all. Whereas the other ways we oriented it, there would be parting lines that would be visible and would require a lot more cleanup. When I look at a sculpture, I immediately start envisioning it as a hole in a block of rubber. But that hole isn't empty, it's full of air. The resin is denser than the air, so the resin is always going to be below the air. So you always have to push the air up. You can't push it in any other direction. And by the way, pressure's not going to help you. It really won't. It will get rid of tiny bubbles, but it won't get rid of big bubbles. It's all in how you position it in the mold. And if you're doing that planning while you're designing, while you're sketching out the object that you're building, if that's part of your thinking and planning, you're going to make your life so easy and you're going to look like a genius at mold making when all it is basically understanding the very few principles I've talked about here. Hey, if you like this video, watch this next video. Keep your projects coming, keep your questions coming, keep your comments coming. You know, I love hearing from all of you guys. It's just endless fun for me. I hope soon to be back in my studio, and I will see you next week.